Get out! I don't want to see you again.
The last thing David Monroe said to his father was, "You're useless." He hadn't meant it to be the last. He hadn't even meant it to hurt the way it did. But those words echoed through his high-rise condo long after Robert Monroe walked out the door. Thoughtful. Where are you watching this from? Maybe you're sitting in your living room, the noise of the world just barely muffled behind your screen. Maybe you're on your commute, headphones in, mind drifting. Maybe you're folding laundry or scrolling absent-mindedly, looking for anything that feels real. Serious. Wherever you are, pause. Thoughtful. And ask yourself, when was the last time you misunderstood someone who loved you? It started like any other Tuesday, a coffee gone cold, notifications lighting up, another deal in motion, success on the surface. But beneath the noise, a familiar tension coiled in David's chest. His father's muted presence haunted the condo like a shadow no light could banish. Robert sat, as always, on the couch. A western flickered across the TV. Dust, horses, and men who spoke with guns instead of words. The same scene every day. The same silence. On the kitchen counter, a bill sat unopened. Cable. Robert's responsibility. One thing. Just one. David picked it up. Overdue. He stared at it. His jaw clenched. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about being seen. About effort. About feeling like the man in that chair gave a damn about anything. About him. He walked into the living room, the bill in hand. Annoyed. "You said you'd take care of this." Robert looked over. Apathetic. "I forgot." That was it. That was always it. "I forgot. I'm sorry." Shrugs and silences and empty spaces. David felt the anger rise from a place so old it tasted like childhood. Angry. "You forgot?" Resigned. "I'll handle it." Firmly. "No, you won't." Robert stood slowly, passive-aggressive. "If I'm in the way..." Bitterly. "You've been in the way since I was a kid." Long pause. Silence, the deepest kind. The kind that swallows rooms whole. Robert didn't yell, didn't slam the door. He just packed a duffel and left. David thought he'd feel relief. He didn't. That night, peace felt like punishment. Every corner of his home echoed with things unsaid. 2 days later, David opened the door to the spare room. The air felt different. He bent to move an old box of clothes and found it. A shoebox. Taped shut. Dusty. Forgotten. He opened it, and everything changed. David Monroe was the neighborhood success story, though most wouldn't guess it from how he carried himself. Clean lines, quiet confidence, and eyes that scanned every room like he was still waiting for someone to tell him no. He was from Southwood, the kind of place people escape from, not return to. But he'd done it, not with a jump shot or a mixtape, but with code, logic, precision. Nights spent staring at a cracked screen while sirens screamed outside his window. At 29, David had money, respect, a tech startup that turned into a rocket ship, his face in magazines, his name whispered in boardrooms. But none of that ever filled the space he carried in his chest. The hollow ache from growing up in a house that felt cold, even in summer. He lived in a luxury condo downtown now, clean, minimalist, the kind of place you show off, not live in. And tucked in the spare room, buried behind second thoughts and guilt, was his father, Robert Monroe. Robert had once been strong, tall, a quiet man with tired eyes and calloused hands. But by the time David made it out, his father had all but disappeared. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. The man spent his days on the couch, watching the same westerns on repeat, mumbling to himself, sometimes nodding off with a book half open in his lap. David never understood it. As a kid, he tried. He used to bring his school drawings to his father, hoping for a reaction, a smile, a "well done, son." But Robert rarely responded, just nodded, eyes somewhere, far away. After David's mom, Angela, passed away from cancer when he was 14, whatever pieces of Robert had been left seemed to scatter. He didn't drink, didn't yell, didn't hit. He just faded. So David learned not to need him. He cooked his own meals, saved lunch money for computer parts, found free Wi-Fi spots to teach himself programming, and eventually he made it out. College scholarships, internships, startups, victory. But that old ache, it followed him. Design makes me bringing Robert into his home felt like paying off an emotional debt. But debts, as he would learn, aren't always closed with money. They need understanding. They need truth. And truth was something Robert never gave. The condo became a place of silence. Two men coexisting. No family dinners, no long talks. Just TV sounds and hallway glances. David tried to bridge the gap, offering to buy his father books, take him to appointments. But Robert would shrug, say, "I'm fine," and retreat into that same stillness. And then came the cable bill. It wasn't even about the money. David could have paid it 1,000 times over, but Robert had promised to handle it. Just one small task, a contribution, a gesture of presence. When David opened the envelope and saw it was overdue, something inside him broke loose. Years of pent-up disappointment, frustration, and confusion, all ignited. He stormed out of his home office, the bill crumpled in his hand, angry. "Dad?" Robert looked up slowly from the couch. The same show was playing, Cowboys and Shadows. Frustrated, "You said you'd pay this." Monotone, "I forgot." Sarcastic, Robert blinked, as if expecting this. "I'll get to it." "No, you won't." David slammed the bill on the table. "You haven't gotten to anything. Not when I was 10, not when I was graduating, not when Mom died. You just checked out." Robert sat still, letting the words fall like ash. "I can't do this," David whispered. "I'm trying to build something, and I'm dragging a ghost through every hallway of this house." That silence again, like a wall David could never break through. Softly, weary. "If I'm in the way," Robert said, rising slowly, resigned, "I'll go." David looked at him, really looked at him. The sag in his shoulders, the wear in his eyes. For a moment, he hesitated. But pain speaks louder than memory. "You've been in the way since I was a kid." Robert didn't argue, just nodded, went to his room, packed a single duffel. No words, no tears, no begging, and he left. David watched the door close, thought he'd feel relief. Instead, he felt something crumble. 2 nights later, he opened the door to the spare room. The silence felt different now, deeper, like the absence of not just a man, but a mystery. And beneath the bed, the box waited, storming. David stormed into the living room, the envelope in hand. "You said you'd take care of it." "I can't keep covering for you." Robert looked up slowly, softly. "I forgot. I'm sorry." Snapping. David snapped. "That's all you ever say." Exasperated. "I forgot. I'm sorry. What do you even do all day? Watch TV and breathe my air?" Robert stood, the pain in his knees visible. Pained, quiet. "If I'm in the way, I'll go." Coldly. "You should have been gone a long time ago," David said, instantly regretting it, but unable to stop. Within minutes, Robert had packed his few belongings and left. No fight, no emotion, just silence. David spent the rest of the day pacing. He told himself he did the right thing, that he deserved peace. But that night, something gnawed at him. Guilt? Maybe. Or something deeper. Uncertainty. That evening, David tried to code. Lines of Python blurred. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, then dropped into his lap. He closed his laptop and stared into the city skyline, the room echoing with Robert's absence. Every corner of the condo felt unfamiliar, like something vital had been scraped out of its walls. The next day, he visited his therapist, a session he'd originally booked for work-related anxiety. Flatly, "My dad's gone," David said flatly, bluntly. "I kicked him out." Gently. His therapist leaned forward. "Why?" Bitterly, laughing bitterly. "Because he was a ghost. Because he let me raise myself." Frustrated, because he couldn't even pay a damn cable bill. "Did you ever ask him why?" she asked gently. David didn't respond. He couldn't, because he never had. and the silence stretched until it broke something in him. 2 days passed. Then David walked into the spare room to clean. That's when he found the box. It was hidden beneath the bed frame, duct-taped closed. Inside, a folded American flag, several yellowed letters, 3 medals, rusted but intact, a photo of a younger Robert in uniform holding a baby, a newspaper clipping, local war hero returns home. David's breath caught. A memory surfaced. He was 6 years old, clinging to his mom's leg as they stood outside the airport. His dad came home with a limp and hollow eyes. That was the first time he noticed the man who returned wasn't the man who left. The photo in his hands looked like that man, young, proud, focused, a stranger and a father all at once. He stayed up that night reading through the letters, each one peeling away the hardened layers of resentment he had carried since boyhood. One letter in particular broke him. Angie, I don't know how to tell David I'm not okay. He deserves a strong father, but all I have are ghosts and echoes. I hope one day he understands why I couldn't be who he needed. David wept, for the first time in years. He wept not just for his father, but for the boy who had felt abandoned, and for the man who had never stopped trying in the only way he could. The next morning, David did something he hadn't done in years. He got in his car, drove to Southwood, and parked in front of a 1-story home with chipped paint and a sun-bleached porch, the home he grew up in. A woman answered the door. Miss Lucretia, the neighbor who used to bring over pound cake and gospel CDs. She blinked in surprise. David Monroe? Lord have mercy. I thought you were in Silicon Valley. I'm still there, just needed to come back. She nodded slowly, sensing more beneath the surface. He's not here, she said before he could ask. Your daddy, he comes by sometimes, sits on the steps, doesn't say much, just stares out at the street, like he's looking for something he left behind. David felt the twist in his chest again. She stepped aside. You want to come in? Inside the old house, the air smelled of lemon oil and memory. The walls still bore the faded outlines of picture frames long taken down. David wandered through slowly, running a finger along the hallway where he once leaned, listening to his mother's voice sing him to sleep. In the back room, the one that used to be his, a thin mattress sat on the floor, a folded blanket, a pair of Robert's boots. He sat down. The silence of that room was different than the one in his condo. This silence was sacred, heavy. He remembered being 5, watching his father shave, imitating him with whipped cream on his face. Back then, Robert had laughed. Back then, things felt amodst again. Without the phone one out, in the past chapter of The Sound in There Forced, Yas to some one of you. To do with a Devis Shear begins to win film, and night estate to once again, toward Jesus' leg, is widing, magnifical state, and so farm, into thous indeed, all. Back in the living room, Miss Lucretia was waiting with a photo album. Your mama left this with me when she got sick. Said it was for you when you were ready. Inside, birthdays, first steps, his father in uniform smiling with pride, a hand on baby David's chest, a scribbled note in Angela's handwriting. Thoughtful. Don't let silence rewrite the story. David stared at the page, her words sinking deep. Urgent. He stood up, heart thudding. Do you know where he is now? Miss Lucretia nodded. Calmly. There's a park 2 blocks over. He goes there around sunset. David drove. Found the bench. Found his father. Robert was sitting with his back straight, hands resting on his knees. He looked up as David approached, his face unreadable. Long pause. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then David sat beside him, quietly. I found the box, he said quietly. Robert didn't look over. Resigned. Figured you might. Hurt. I didn't know. Regretful. I didn't want you to. Not when you were a boy. Not when I was still broken. The sun dipped lower. Light softened. Sadly. You should have told me, David said. Robert nodded. Vulnerable. I know, but I was scared. Scared you'd see me the way I saw myself. Probing. And how was that? Robert finally turned. Solemn. As a man who came home, but never really returned. David looked away, blinking back heat behind his eyes. Whispering, I blamed you for everything, he whispered. But I didn't know the war didn't end for you. I blame myself, Robert said, for everything I couldn't give you, for not being the father you deserved. Long pause. They sat in silence again. David reached into his coat, pulled out the photo from the box, held it between them. Hopeful. You were a hero, weren't you? Robert gave a soft laugh, chuckles. Just a man who survived. And for the first time in years, David smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because the silence had finally broken. The desert heat in Kandahar didn't just burn, it peeled. It peeled layers of memory, skin, and soul. Staff Sergeant Robert Monroe stood under a sun that gave no mercy, boots buried in sand, eyes locked on a valley where the silence before a strike always came too late. It was the summer of 2005. Robert had just turned 37. His unit, Charlie Company, had been running recon on a village suspected of harboring insurgents. A modes again. Without the phone, one out, in the past chapter of the Sound in There Forced, Yas to some one of you. To do with a Devis Shear begins to win film, and night estate to once again, toward Jesus' leg, is widing, magnifical state, and so farm, into thous indeed, all. Back in the living room, Miss Lucretia was waiting with a photo album. Your mama left this with me when she got sick. Said it was for you when you were ready. Inside, birthdays, first steps, his father in uniform smiling with pride, a hand on baby David's chest, a scribbled note in Angela's handwriting. Thoughtful. Don't let silence rewrite the story. David stared at the page, her words sinking deep. Urgent. He stood up, heart thudding. Do you know where he is now? Miss Lucretia nodded. Calmly. There's a park 2 blocks over. He goes there around sunset. David drove. Found the bench. Found his father. Robert was sitting with his back straight, hands resting on his knees. He looked up as David approached, his face unreadable. Long pause. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then David sat beside him, quietly. I found the box, he said quietly. Robert didn't look over. Resigned. Figured you might. Hurt. I didn't know. Regretful. I didn't want you to. Not when you were a boy. Not when I was still broken. The sun dipped lower. Light softened. Sadly. You should have told me, David said. Robert nodded. Vulnerable. I know. But I was scared. Scared you'd see me the way I saw myself. Probing. And how was that? Robert finally turned. Solemn. As a man who came home, but never really returned. David looked away, blinking back heat behind his eyes. Whispering, I blamed you for everything, he whispered. But I didn't know the war didn't end for you. I blame myself, Robert said, for everything I couldn't give you, for not being the father you deserved. Long pause. They sat in silence again. David reached into his coat, pulled out the photo from the box, held it between them. Hopeful. You were a hero, weren't you? Robert gave a soft laugh, chuckles. Just a man who survived. And for the first time in years, David smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because the silence had finally broken. The desert heat in Kandahar didn't just burn, it peeled. It peeled layers of memory, skin, and soul. Staff Sergeant Robert Monroe stood under a sun that gave no mercy, boots buried in sand, eyes locked on a valley where the silence before a strike always came too late. It was the summer of 2005. Robert had just turned 37. His unit, Charlie Company, had been running recon on a village suspected of harboring insurgents. Amodst again. Without the phone one out, in the past chapter of the sound in there forced, Yas to some one of you. To do with a devashir begins to win film, and night estate to once again, toward Jesus' leg, is widing, magnical state, and so farm, into thous indeed, all. Back in the living room, Miss Lucretia was waiting with a photo album. Your mama left this with me when she got sick. Said it was for you when you were ready. Inside, birthdays, first steps, his father in uniform smiling with pride, a hand on baby David's chest, a scribbled note in Angela's handwriting. Thoughtful. Don't let silence rewrite the story. David stared at the page, her words sinking deep. Urgent. He stood up, heart thudding. Do you know where he is now? Miss Lucretia nodded. Calmly. There's a park 2 blocks over. He goes there around sunset. David drove. Found the bench. Found his father. Robert was sitting with his back straight, hands resting on his knees. He looked up as David approached, his face unreadable. Long pause. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then David sat beside him, quietly. I found the box, he said quietly. Robert didn't look over. Resigned. Figured you might. Hurt. I didn't know. Regretful. I didn't want you to. Not when you were a boy. Not when I was still broken. The sun dipped lower. Light softened. Sadly. You should have told me, David said. Robert nodded. Vulnerable. I know. But I was scared. Scared you'd see me the way I saw myself. Probing. And how was that? Robert finally turned. Solemn. As a man who came home, but never really returned. David looked away, blinking back heat behind his eyes. Whispering, I blamed you for everything, he whispered. But I didn't know the war didn't end for you. I blame myself, Robert said, for everything I couldn't give you, for not being the father you deserved. Long pause. They sat in silence again. David reached into his coat, pulled out the photo from the box, held it between them. Hopeful. You were a hero, weren't you? Robert gave a soft laugh, chuckles. Just a man who survived. And for the first time in years, David smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because the silence had finally broken. The desert heat in Kandahar didn't just burn, it peeled. It peeled layers of memory, skin, and soul. Staff Sergeant Robert Monroe stood under a sun that gave no mercy, boots buried in sand, eyes locked on a valley where the silence before a strike always came too late. It was the summer of 2005. Robert had just turned 37. His unit, Charlie Company, had been running recon on a village suspected of harboring insurgents. They'd been out for 13 days, rationing water, cycling shifts of sleep, watching shadows for movement. Then came the roadside blast. It hit the Humvee behind his. 3 of his closest friends, Gonzalez, Penn, and Howell, were inside. One moment they were laughing about peanut butter MREs. The next, they were gone. Robert remembered the ringing first, then the dust, then the screaming. His own leg had caught shrapnel, his helmet cracked, but none of that mattered. He crawled back toward the wreckage, dragging himself with raw fingers through jagged gravel. It was too late. Later, when the medevac came and the reports were filed, Robert received a commendation for bravery. They called him a hero. He remembered standing there, holding the folded flag that had been on Gonzalez's casket, and feeling like a liar. Back in the barracks, Robert wrote a letter he never sent. Softly, David, gravely. Today I watched 3 men die, disturbed. I saw things no child should ever know his father has seen, wearily. I wish I could say I'm okay, that I'll come home the same. Psych, but I won't. Earnestly, I need you to know something, even if you never read this, softly. If I'm quiet when I return, it's not because I don't love you, brokenly. It's because I'm still trying to find the pieces of me I left out here. When Robert returned home months later, he limped off the plane and into a world that had moved on. Angela was waiting with David in her arms, 7 years old and wide-eyed. He hugged them both, but something inside him didn't connect. He tried. For months, he tried. But flashbacks haunted him, explosions in his dreams, the smell of burning rubber, Gonzalez's laugh fading into screams. He couldn't keep a job, couldn't sleep, couldn't explain. David would sit beside him on the couch coloring. Robert would stare at the wall, lost. Angela noticed first, the withdrawn stares, the way he jumped at loud noises, the nights he wandered the house. She asked him to get help. He said he would, but pride is a stubborn thing. After Angela's cancer diagnosis, Robert fell deeper into himself. He spent nights by her bedside, praying she'd recover. When she didn't, something inside him fractured beyond repair. David was 14 then, and Robert, already haunted by war, was now haunted by loss. So he faded, bit by bit, not because he stopped loving his son, but because he didn't know how to love while broken. He started writing again, letters he never mailed, journals no one read, a box of unspoken truths he hid away, hoping David would one day understand. And now, years later, David had. The air in the condo felt different now, warmer. Not because Robert had returned, he hadn't, but because David had changed. For days after their meeting in the park, David walked through his life with new eyes. He saw the men at boardroom tables as fathers, brothers, sons. He noticed the tired security guard downstairs and wondered what ghosts he might carry. He in the shoebox, each one revealing another piece of the father he never knew. And then he made a decision. It started with a phone call, then 2, then 5. David reached out to a veteran counseling center in the city, then a homeless outreach group, then a startup incubator. He pitched them an idea, a digital platform that would connect war veterans with mental health services, job placement, and community spaces, all built around storytelling. He called it Echoes. Because sometimes what's left behind is louder than what was said, he explained to his developers. The team launched the beta in 90 days. Robert's story was the first anonymous entry. David uploaded a redacted version of the letters, omitting names but preserving emotion. The response was immediate. Thousands of reads, hundreds of shares. Messages from vets who thought no one else had lived their silence. David sat in his office one night, staring at the dashboard as the numbers climbed. Then his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. David Monroe? Yes. This is Clara from St. Luke's. I believe your father's here. He was at the hospital. Exhaustion and dehydration. A nurse had found his ID in a worn wallet and called the emergency contact. David raced there, heart pounding. When he arrived, Robert was awake, eyes sunken but alert. You came, he said. David sat beside the bed, gripping the metal rail. You didn't think I would? Robert smiled weakly. I didn't think I deserved it. You didn't, David said honestly, but I came anyway. Robert's hand twitched. David reached out, their hands met, rough and calloused and real. I started something, David whispered, a place for men like you, like us, to talk, to be heard. Robert didn't speak, just nodded, tears forming behind tired lids. Weeks passed, Robert was discharged. David brought him home, not out of obligation, but out of choice. They rebuilt slowly, one dinner, one walk, one difficult conversation at a time. David showed him the site. Robert read entry after entry, eyes glistening. You gave them a voice, he said. David shook his head. You did. I just handed them the mic. Months later, Echoes became national news. Funding poured in, celebrities endorsed it, veterans from every corner of the country joined, and David spoke at the launch of Echoes 2.0. My name is David Monroe, and for most of my life, I hated a man I didn't understand, a man I thought abandoned me. But the truth is, he was still fighting a war I never saw. And once I stopped being angry long enough to listen, I found him, and I found myself. The room rose in applause. In the front row, Robert stood too, shoulders back, chin high, eyes clear. For the first time in years, David didn't feel hollow. He felt whole. 1 year later, the sun filtered through the windows of David's condo in golden sheets. It was morning, but not rushed. No buzzing phones, no back-to-back meetings, just the smell of coffee and the low hum of jazz playing from Robert's Bluetooth speaker. He stood in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal with deliberate movements. His back was straighter now. He had gained a little weight, smiled more, laughed even, mostly at reruns of comedies David had never seen him watch before. "Breakfast ready?" David asked, walking in with 2 mugs. Robert nodded, gently. "You still drink it too strong." David chuckled, amused. "You still eat like you're on deployment." They sat together. No rush, no tension, just quiet, shared space. Later that day, they visited a local Echoes Community Center. The place buzzed with activity, vets talking, young coders mentoring, counselors greeting new faces. On the wall was a mural, a painted shoebox opening, letters flying out like birds into the sky. Underneath, a plaque read, "To all those whose silence held stories, speak, we are listening." Robert stood before it, eyes misty. Softly, "You think she'd be proud?" he asked. David turned to him. Reassuringly, she already was. The center had helped thousands, offering housing assistance, therapy, jobs. But more than that, it gave people permission to be human, flawed, healing. At the annual gala, David gave a speech, not as a CEO, but as a son. Calmly, "I once told my father he was useless," he said, voice clear and calm. "But now I know sometimes we mistake silence for absence, but silence is often just pain with nowhere to go." He looked at Robert in the front row. The audience followed his gaze, emphatically. "And pain," he continued, "isn't weakness, it's a signal. And healing is what happens when we finally answer it." Thunderous applause. But all David saw was his father, standing to clap, a single tear cutting through a weathered cheek. The next morning, they drove to Angela's grave. Robert knelt, his hand resting gently on the headstone. "I'm trying," he whispered. David placed a folded letter beside the flowers. Gently, "She always knew we would," he said. They sat there in silence, not the old kind, the kind that hurt, but a new kind, peaceful, full. On the drive home, David rolled the window down. Wind rushed in, cool and fresh. He turned to his father, determined. "Let's stop blaming the past," he said. "Let's just live what's left." Robert nodded, and for the first time since the war, since the silence, since the shoebox, they both truly began. If this story moved you, take a moment today to reach out to someone you've misunderstood, or someone who might be carrying a silent burden. Share this story with a friend, a parent, or a veteran you care about. Let's spark more conversations that heal, not just hurt. Leave a comment below, thoughtful, and tell us, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Have you ever found something, like a letter or a photo, that changed how you saw someone you love?